As you guessed, this seminar on Japanese economy and society is more and more concerned with women and family issues, which is my own interest in fact. And when I decided to hold a seminar around on domestic violence, I must say that I faced several negative remarks. As, is it relevant for Japan? Or are you sure people would be interested in such an issue? At the same time, when I organized conferences on couples and family in Japan and France, I had the feeling that domestic violence is a kind of black hole in the discourse of, on Japanese family and nowadays changes. And I have also, I must confess, been very impressed by some reactions from the Japanese public, and more especially for the male public, which shows a certain kind of, a certain amount of violence against women in the questions, I mean. And I really wanted to know more about this problem, and that's why I contacted Professor Numazaki. So I'm very grateful that he accepted to come today to talk about this issue. Professor Numazaki is an anthropologist and a professor at Tohoku University. He specialized in East Asian cultures and more specifically on Taiwan, where he lived during 3 years. But he is also deeply involved in human rights, rights for the foreigners living in Japan, rights for the handicapped persons, and also for the women victims of violence. He has published widely on this issue, and quite a lot of his papers are in English, so you can find them very easily, I think. Thank you so much to be here, and thank you so much to talk about this difficult issue. I really hope that we will learn thanks to you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me here today. And pardonnez-moi, je ne peux pas parler le français, so I'll just talk in English. Let me start with my own introduction. Why am I here? And why me on this topic? And I have to confess that I had absolutely no interest in women's issues or violence or anything related to that. And when I started studying anthropology, I went to graduate school in the United States, and I chose Taiwan as my field, and I did research on large-scale business enterprises there, and their social and other networks. So my real specialty is economy and society in Taiwan. But to start with, I made a terrible mistake of marrying a feminist. Well, my wife is no activist. She doesn't do anything special, but she just happened to be a very strongly independent-minded woman. Doesn't really appreciate or accept Japanese culture, and she is very individualistic, independent-minded woman. And it so happens that she was working, and she wanted to keep her maiden family name after being married to me. And first we legally got married. And then, according to the Japanese civil code, you have to choose either a husband's or wife's family name as a common family name. But so she, on paper, became Numazaki, but then she kept using her own family name in her work. And it was in the early 1990s. And it's in the early 90s, so some women started to keep using their family name at work even after they get married and legally changed their family names. And there were several groups of these people who were pushing for the legal reform. And in 1994, the government finally decided that they would change the Japanese family code and allow marrying couples to choose either they choose single family name or keep double family name on their family registration. But then when the government proposed the amendment, there was a strong reaction from the Jiminto, Jiyu-Minshito, the Liberal Democratic Party, and also certain Shinto-related religious groups, that such a change will destroy Japanese family and it's against Japanese tradition and all that. And as an anthropologist, I felt that, it's not really a Japanese tradition to begin with. And also from a human rights perspective, I got involved in this controversy and started to associate with many women activists and feminist lawyers and these people. And wrote petitions and published pamphlets or wrote on a popular journal and all that. And that brought me into contact with these feminist activists and feminist scholars in Japan. And then came sexual harassment issues that in the middle of 1990s, there were several major sexual harassment scandals or incidents in major Japanese universities. And because I was associated with all these feminist people, I got involved in organizing a network trying to cope with this issue and also to help victims of sexual harassment on campus. And then one female graduate student sued a professor at my own university, and I got involved in lawsuits and supporting the plaintiffs and all that. And we contacted some women groups to help support these sexual harassment victims. And then they were the ones who were fighting domestic violence also. So I was kind of dragged into all this by a series of accidents, and there was nothing academic about my involvement at the beginning. But then these women activists told me that either sexual harassment or domestic violence, all the bad guys are men. And you are a man, so you do something about them. And I didn't know what to do. But it happens that I had a chance to visit Harvard University for a year from 2000 to 2001. And Cambridge, Massachusetts is a home to this group called IFRJ, which is a Battered intervention program that tried to re-educate, abusive husbands. And I thought maybe I could just look into what they were doing, and took a short training course there and started to learn about the sort of American theories of domestic violence and practices. And it was really interesting because it doesn't matter if you are Japanese or American, or for that matter, I would guess French or British or Bango or somewhere, that they all make similar kinds of excuses for their abusive behaviors. And it looks like one activist in the movement said that since they all make such an almost exactly the same excuses for hitting or kicking or harassing their partners, they look like they went to the same training course and studied from the same textbook. And so it seems that this domestic violence is a universal problem, and it interested me as an anthropologist to look at this issue. Is it really universal, or is there anything culturally specific about it? And how about Japanese men? So my wife, this is 15 years ago, my wife said that Japan should be worse than the United States because Japanese men are all male chauvinist pigs, and Americans are more egalitarian and all that. And then one of the directors at this IFRJ, he was an white Caucasian psychologist, but he said exactly the opposite to me. That, oh, Japanese are so peaceful, and the Japanese society is so calm and safe, and surely you won't have this kind of problem in Japan. And of course, both are wrong. Now, and so just to look back at the Japanese history a little bit. So how was it in Japan? And there's a popular saying in Japan, Jishin, Kaminari, Kaji, Oyaji, means earthquake, thunder, fire, and father. These four are sort of a natural calamities that you cannot avoid. So family violence was regarded as some kind of a natural disaster. And the father is like a volcano, and it simply erupts. And you can't help it. And then and there's a popular word, teishu kanpaku, which means the husband, the lord. And the husband, as the head of the family, is authorized to demand total submission from his wife and children. And kanpaku is, in fact, is an office in a Japanese royal court, the highest office that supports the emperor. But the word is used as someone behaving like the top of the top leader. And teishu kanpaku means that the husband is behaving like the boss and demands all kinds of things from his family member. And of course, teaching lessons with physical force if necessary is among his prerogative. So using violence was kind of a part of the legitimate rule of the family. And if you look at the popular TV programs, this is Terauchi Kantaro Ikka. The show was broadcast in 1974, 1975, and it was very popular. And this guy is this typical oyaji, or father, who doesn't talk much, who's quiet, and if he gets mad, he just erupts and kick his family, his children, and all that. But there was no opposition or criticism against this kind of a TV show. That people just laughed at the show and took it casually. And then there is a famous song by Sada Masashi, Kanpaku Sengen, a declaration to be the kanpaku in the house. And that teishu kanpaku is idealized in a popular song. And I'll just explain this, the lyrics. And this is a man declaring himself to become this kanpaku thing when he gets married. And it goes like this. I want to say something before I take you as my wife. And my words will be harsh, but it's my true feeling, so you have to listen to me. And then he says, don't go to bed before I do. And then don't get up later than I do. And then cook well and be pretty every day. And then finally he says, don't say anything and just follow me. It was a very popular song, and it ranked second highest in the hit chart, I think, that year. And of course, a lot of women loved the song also. And then this is the famous morning TV drama show called Oshin, which is seen worldwide, almost worldwide. It was very popular in Taiwan. It was very popular in other Southeast Asian countries. And it was, in fact, shown in Iran as well. And all the Asian women sympathized with the main character, Oshin, who was sold to as a housemaid by her parents in early age. And this is the scene when the parents sold her for just a sack of rice, and she was shipped down the river to the town. And it's 1983-84 on NHK. And in fact, the story, if you look at it from the today's point of view, is just a series of domestic violence and child abuse and human trafficking, and it was was welcomed and accepted and applauded as a nice family drama in the 1980s. But things started to change in the late 80s and in the 1990s. The first shelter for abused women were opened in Tokyo in 1986. But this was mostly for foreign wives married to Japanese men. And then in 1993, another shelter was opened for abused wives in Tokyo. And then similar shelters started to pop up in major cities in Japan. This is about 20 years later than compared to other countries. Like in the United States, these shelter movements started in the mid-1970s. And then in 1998, National Women's Shelters Network was formed, led by a really fiercely aggressive feminist women in Sapporo. I know them all. They're a good friend of mine. And the first national symposium on domestic violence and shelter movement was held in Sapporo. And since then, the national symposium is held around Japan every year, and we will be holding an 18th symposium later this year. And then in 2001, the so-called the DV law was enacted in Japan, and the official name of the law is very long, and it goes like Prevention of Spousal Violence and Protection of Victims Act. I think it's the right translation, but I'll talk about the law later. And then this is on the opening page of the website of this National Women's Shelters Network, and it says, counseling room for domestic female victims of domestic violence, and these cages are supposed to be each family or a house, and someone is taken captive inside. And if you look at this MSN logo, you can click it and then jump to the MSN website. But in fact, Microsoft is donating a huge amount of money to this National Women's Shelters Network. And this is the URL, so you can Google it. Domestic violence, of course, domestic violence, it's a katakana word. It's an imported loan word. It's not a native word. I don't think we do have really a traditional or authentic or native Japanese word for wife abuse or family, child abuse or any kind of violence inside the family. And like sexual harassment, it is also a katakana word, sexual harassment, or a shorthand is sekuhara. It was imported from English. And the domestic violence is also the word imported from English. But usually in the United States, domestic violence is less popular than words like family violence or wife abuse or partner violence, intimate partner violence, or that kind of thing. And but the shorthand DV in Japanese, DV is read DV in Japanese. And sometimes in Tohoku area, it's more, locally pronounced as debris or something like that. But so this new shorthand DV gave a name to the so far unnamed problem. And now you can talk about things that you were not able to talk about because you got the name for it. So Teishu Kanpaku now is called DV-yotto, the domestic violence husband. Or in fact, if someone says that he is a Teishu Kanpaku or he wants to be a Teishu Kanpaku, then a wife or a partner can challenge him, calling that no, it's not allowed anymore. If you do that, you'll be committing a domestic violence. And so, how bad is the situation in Japan? And I'll just give you some rough figures. This is from the Cabinet Office research done in 2014. And there's a Gender Equality Bureau in the Cabinet Office. Cabinet Office in Japan is something like it's not really a office serving the cabinet, but it's a separate agency that sort of coordinates all other ministries. And Gender Equality Bureau or Gender Equality Office is created inside this cabinet office, and it does research and other work. And this is a figure from 2014 research, just published this March, I think. And for married women, 1 in 4 experiences spousal violence. They answered yes to the question if you had ever experienced violence in your home. And the number is 1.5 times more than men. So 1 in 6 men also say that they experience violence from their spouses, but 1 in 4 women answered say so. And then those who answered they experience violence many times is 1 in 10 for women, compared to it's almost 3 times more than men. And 1 in 9 women says they experienced life-threatening violence. They feared for their life. And again, the figure is twice as much as men. And then 30% of those women who said that they experienced violence answered that 30% of them said that their children also suffered abusive behavior from father. And recently, they also do questionnaire on unmarried women, because there are so many of them now. And for unmarried couples, 1 in 5 says 1 in 5 women say that they experience violence from their partners, and the figure is about twice as much for men. And 1 in 3, the proportion increases to 1 in 3 if they're living together, even if they're not married. And interestingly or alarmingly, 1 in 4 unmarried women say that they experience life-threatening violence, and I think that the proportion is larger than the ones who are already married. And also 1 in 10 women says that she has been stalked by a former ex-boyfriend or former partner. And the figures are, as you can see, all much higher for women than men. But one footnote to this government research: this is a ordinary questionnaire survey, and so a lot of men also answered that yes, I have experienced violence from my wife. But that includes, this kind of survey cannot distinguish domestic violence from regular quarrels or occasional fights. And there's a qualitative difference between domestic violence and sort of a 普通の夫婦喧嘩, regular, quarrels between husband and wife, in that the domestic violence produces constant fear in women, and she cannot escape from that fear 24 hours a day or 365 days a year. Even if husband is away, she's scared if what he's gonna do when he comes back, and then the abusive husband is constantly watching and monitoring the behavior of women, and he imposes so many rules on her that she cannot do this, she cannot do that, she has to do this and she has to do that, and that's quite different from. So she totally lacks freedom of thought or speech or behavior, and that's quite different from ordinary couples. They may fight with fists occasionally, but then if nothing happens, I mean, you feel safe and free. So we always say that if you can relax and feel that you are free and safe sometimes, then that's, maybe it's not okay to be violent, but it's sort of okay. But if you are constantly in fear, and if you are always afraid of your husband, your partner, and you have no freedom of action, or if you cannot talk freely to anybody, then that might be a sign of domestic violence. And so in the mid-90s, we started to hear about domestic violence, and especially after 2001, when this DV law was enacted, domestic violence, or DV, became a popular word in Japanese. But sometimes it's explained away as a trivial or non-issue. And here I just listed two metaphors or sayings. That kannin bukuro no o ga kireru means kannin bukuro is a bag or a sack in which you have the stock of patience, and then it's tied by a string. But then if the string is cut, then your anger all sort of erupts out. And nowadays you say kireru or kireta, he just snapped in Japanese. So it means that the violence is a kind of an eruption that happens, and anger or frustration inside you just sort of erupts out or pops out. There are some scientific explanations for that kind of eruption of violence also, and the cycle theory of violence is first proposed by Alice Walker. And it is sort of mistranslated or misappropriated into discourse of domestic violence, I think. And then there are some psychiatrists. I hope none of you are psychiatrists here, but who claims that this violence is sort of symptom of a personality disorder of some kind. And either lay or scientific, I think the image of violent men is a volcano, and this is my drawing, but I use it in my talks everywhere. But so a violent man is conceived like a volcano, and deep inside his heart he has some sort of a injury or anger or feeling, and it gradually grows, and then he cannot control himself and just simply erupts. And then once eruption is over, goes back to a sort of a normal person. And I call this volcano model of violence because it doesn't matter if it's then if you are a psychologist trying to sort of elaborate on this model, then you can have all kinds of theories about it. But it doesn't matter if it's scientific or not. It's sort of fits the popular image. But then popular image is wrong. That is the message of American anti-domestic violence movement. And those feminist activists who support victims of partner abuse are proposing different models to explain male violence. And one famous one is the power and control model. It is called the Duluth model because a group who started abusive husband intervention program in a small town called Duluth in Minnesota. And this is their model. And why men commit violence? Because several kinds of violence, sexual, physical, verbal, and all that. But using intimidation, emotional abuse, isolation, blaming, all kinds of means, men control women by using all these means. And violence is a means to control your partner. And then I call this the emerge theory because I learned it there. Violence is a choice theory against the violence is a disease or violence is natural eruption model. And and this is the drawings that I use when I talk about domestic violence. And this is the volcano model that I explained earlier. And this is the popular image of, eruptive violence. But in fact, this volcano has a lid on it. And this man doesn't open it outside. So he doesn't erupt in a company office or he doesn't erupt in a public place. He can control himself, no matter how angry he is at his boss or, no matter how frustrated he is in a public place. He doesn't erupt at all. And he only take off his lid and erupts inside the family, and he is always targeting his wife and children. So he has a specific targets, and it's not a eruption of it's not natural or uncontrollable eruption. Violence is a targeted behavior that threatens and intimidate and scare them into submission. So he can put a lid on himself or just take it off, and he is doing it by his choice. He can control himself, and he's not losing his control, but he's controlling his behavior in such a way that specifically use violent means to control his family member. This is the drawing that I use every time I talk about domestic violence. And now I'll turn to the Japanese domestic violence law. And it is a quite unusual piece of legal achievement, I would say. It's not enough, but it's a very unique law in that it was proposed and pushed by the activists themselves, and they engaged female lawmakers across party line in upper house of the Japanese Diet first. And these female lawmakers sponsored this law and proposed to the house at the upper house. And usually Japanese laws, 80-90% of them are proposed by the government. All the bureaucrats prepare all kinds of laws, including all these so-called war laws that are debated now. It's proposed by the office, administration, but in fact all these articles and are drafted by the bureaucrats. But this law was drafted by the lawmakers themselves. Yeah, so the lawmaker is a misnomer for Japanese, cabinet. Members of the either lower or upper houses. They just approve bureaucrats' authored laws and don't make their own laws. But this is the one of the very few laws that are drafted and proposed by the lawmakers themselves, and they were answering to the demands of the feminist activists. And it took some time to pass the both houses, but it passed and became a law in 2001. But to make it sort of passable, all the contents were sort of muted or sanitized, and so a lot of women activists say, and I also think, that there are many shortcomings in the law, but still it's a law, and it is really amazing that about the time 2000 and 2001 when this became a news, that a new law on domestic violence is going to be enacted, and then all these women who were coming to the activist counseling rooms, that year we had a lot of women asking, my husband suddenly stopped hitting me, but he still controls me and in all kinds of ways, but he just stopped hitting, and what happened? And they knew that there was some rumors around that, and all these men are so really sensitive to these, social messages that they sense that something like a new law is going to be passed, and he will get arrested for hitting his wife next year. So hit her before that happens. I will just talk about how the law was muted and compromised. And the first thing is that in a preamble it says, it doesn't say that hitting or kicking or shouting is a crime. And the Japanese sentence is really convoluted, but it translates like this. When women are subject to violence from their spouses, it has hazardous effect on the dignity of individuals. It doesn't say it's an infringement of human rights outright. Even though spousal violence constitutes serious violation of human rights, including acts that correspond to crime, they don't say it's a crime against humanity, which it is. But the law says that if you do that to someone else, it's a crime. And it's the same thing that you are doing to your wife. But it's not a crime yet. But if you do that, it's bad to your spouse. So don't do that. Something like this. And then about the police involvement. The law stipulates in Article 8 that when police considers that there are cases of spousal violence, they shall endeavor to take necessary measures in order to prevent blah, 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 blah. And endeavor is 努力する, 努力義務 in Japanese. It's a sort of an excuse not to do anything. You are advised and encouraged to do something, but you're not really required to do that. And if you're not really required to do that by law, then you won't get punished for not doing anything. And so initially, police involvement in domestic violence cases were very low. But it's been 15 years since the enactment of this law, and I would say that there is a progress in police involvement. And that more and more people are coming to police for assistance, and police do get involved more often than they used to. But they are reluctant to arrest the perpetrators. And because they are not arrested, all these abusive men think that they are excused by police, even if they are not arrested. So it's okay to hit your wife. So the police is issuing a wrong message. By not arresting them, they're telling that okay, it's bad, but it's okay. that we won't get you. So all these victims and survivors and the activists in the shelter movement and are demanding that to change the law so as to mandate police arrest of perpetrator of violence. But it's not happened yet, and we, the activists, are demanding that since these abusive husbands are committing violent crimes, they should be arrested and they should be prosecuted and they should be convicted and they should be held responsible for their crimes. And if if they get arrested, then they will learn that it's not okay to hit your wife. And if they're convicted and sentenced to a certain amount of incarceration or other or fines, then they will learn that committing family violence is costly. And if the people see that happens, then the society will learn that it's not okay to hit your wife or a child. And we also demand that the police should get involved in the very early stage of the domestic violence, because when the violence is still not so serious, because then there is a tendency for abusive husband to get more abusive if they are not stopped at the early stage. And a lot of domestic violence and stalking ends up in murder. And the number of murders in Japan is very low. It's about 1,000 or less than 2,000 a year, 2,000 cases in a year. So Japan as a whole is safer than Chicago or New York, but still, about 15 to 20% of these murders are family violence related. And the activist women will say that one wife is killed every 3 days in Japan, and because the figure of female victims of murder, the number of women killed or almost killed by their husband is about 100 or so every year, and the number fluctuates, but it hasn't changed much. So they say one woman is killed every 3 days, and okay. I'll just finally talk about my own advocacy work, and this is not really my research work, but it's really a sort of a activist work. And so I write easy-to-read things, and sometimes I translate English writings into Japanese to make so that people can read what's happening in the United States. And then I go on giving talks and lectures around Japan. And I also had, in several cases, got involved in court cases as an expert witness, and also shown up on TV. This is a small booklet. It's called booklet in Japan, but it's like something between pamphlet and a book. It's a 60-page book, short one, and the title says "Why Men Choose Violence." Oops. And this short book is used in many shelters. My friends tell me that when a woman comes to a shelter, they'll just give this book to her and ask her to read it overnight, because it's a short 60-page book. You can read it quite easily. And a lot of them, or almost all of them, come back next morning and say that I was in this book, which is understandable because I am telling their stories. basically. And since the domestic violence cases are so similar all over the world, you can easily find yourself in this description. And this is a clipping from a local newspaper that I contributed recently. Earlier, the paper reported that the Miyagi has the highest number of reports of domestic violence for 3 years in a row. And the article depicted it as something like a bad thing, because it looks, and apparently the author thought that the number shows that Miyagi is the worst violent prefecture in Japan. And I said it's wrong. The number of reports are only the tip of the iceberg, and if the number is high, it means that people are realizing the problem and reporting it, so it's a good thing. And then this is the TV show on NHK in January 15 this year. And it says domestic violence issues that came out after the Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami. And more and more domestic violence cases are reported in Miyagi, Fukushima, and Iwate that suffered most in this, the earthquake and tsunami 4 years ago. And I talked on this show that the reason is that all these small, closed, rural communities were suddenly opened up because of this natural disaster, and all kinds of aid and not only aid and researchers and support and volunteers came into these places. A lot of women activists also went in because there were many gender-related issues in rescuing efforts and evacuation and all that, and they brought in and they opened up the closed community and exposed people on the countryside to sort of new issues. And suddenly, many of them realized that they were also having a problem of violence in their home. And my colleagues working in Miyagi are hosting a lot of lectures and training courses in these disaster-affected areas for the past 3-4 years to really spread the message and train and nurture some of these activists in these areas. I think I talked enough, so I'll just stop here, and I will be glad to answer any kind of questions from you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for this presentation, a very complete presentation. I have many, many questions, but okay, I will have just maybe two and then let the floor speak with you. I just want first to know, you say that 25% of women experience violence from their husband in this cabinet office Chosa. But I wondered if it is the number of women who said I suffered from my husband, right? And as you said, a lot of women won't be able to say I had suffered from. So, of course, the number of women who are victims from domestic violence is, I think, a bit more. It's more numbers. But I would like to know how these numbers correspond to the numbers you can find through the NPO's movement or through the NPO's activities.
Well, in fact, there is no way to assess the exactness or accuracy of these figures. Mm. And as I said earlier, you cannot. Those questionnaire surveys don't really tell you what kind of violence they were reporting on the questionnaire, and all these. If you talk to people who are running shelters for abused wives, they will tell you that those women who actually come to these shelters escaping from their husband are doing so only after they think that, okay, if I'm not leaving, I'll be dead tomorrow. So they will wait until the last moment, or they will endure all kinds of violence, accept them, and try to cope with their husband as much as they can. And only if they fear that their own lives or children's lives are really in danger, then they will finally decide to leave and escape and visit these shelters. So these are the very extreme cases, and most of the domestic violences are hidden inside all these homes, and you can't really see from the outside. And all these, abusive husbands, they look quite normal outside, and so they are a normal person in their office. They are at work. They are normal. They look like normal father, or they even look like a very affectionate father outside the house. They will cheer at their killed kids on a field day, or they will come to see their kids play soccer or baseball and all that, to take videos, and they look quite normal. And they are very cordial and friendly to their neighbors, so you can't really tell from the outside. And so it's really, I would say it's impossible really to grasp what is the accurate number of all these cases. But if at least these figures show that it's not a small problem, it's widespread. And if they are asked and if they can answer, they will say that, yeah, I had this kind of experience.
Another point is, you said that nearly 100 of women die every year, and that it's quite a constant number. Do you mean that the law has not changed anything?
Well, if you the law has, as I said, the law had a lot of impact on Japanese society. That, for one thing, that now domestic violence and DV are popular words, that most people know the words, but they really don't know what it exactly means. And a lot of victims say that, my husband are bad, but I thought all these domestic violence means worse husband, And many of them with broken bones and injured faces say that I thought my problem was trivial compared to the real domestic violence. So it's really hard to realize that you are in serious trouble. A lot of women can't really grasp that. But more and more people are coming to police or all these shelters, and so the law did have impact. But I would say that the impact has not reached the real serious group of abusers and their victims. That's why the number of deaths are still constant, even though the number itself is small compared to other nations. And if you look at United States, as I said, the shelter movement started in the mid-1970s. And a lot of, different state has different laws in the United States, but many states started to enact similar kinds of domestic violence laws. And in mid-1970s, the intimate partner murders were about 3,000 every year in the United States. And the victims are equally divided between husband and wives, or male and female, because and it's not that there were equal number of female abusers, but the abused wife killed their husband to save their lives. And so if you're really pushed to a corner, you have either you are killed or you have to kill your husband. And so in the mid-1970s, it was 1,500 men killed by abused wives, and also 1,500 abused wives killed by their abusive husbands. But since then, the number of shelters increased, and a lot of women became, aware of their problems, and they found means to leave early before that, life or death situation. So the number of husbands killed by abused wives decreased to about 500-600 a year. But on the other hand, those abused wives killed by their husband, the number hasn't changed much in the United States because all these abusers chase their women even if they leave, and then try to kill her unless she comes back. So the female victims of intimate partner murder hasn't decreased much in the United States, but the male victims became 1/3 of the number in the 1970s, and activists in the United States say that because women are now able to leave before they are forced to kill their husband, so the number of abusers are surviving. More and more male abusers are surviving now. So that happened in the United States, but the similar thing this hasn't happened in Japan yet in the past 15 years. So my guess is that the message or this new policy is not reaching the group, the real serious group people in the real serious situation.
As you say, the problem is to say it is domestic violence. In my own research, a lot of women say, "Oh, my husband is not so bad, but when he drank," and then you can believe that yeah. So it's not really about domestic violence, but just in certain times he's dangerous, something like that. So
yeah, a lot of people say that, 父ちゃん飲まなければいい人なんだけど、he's a good husband unless he drinks, but then we tell them, okay, well, if you really get drunk, you don't know what you are doing, so you can't hit you. Real drunkards will just go sleep, go to bed and sleep, fall asleep, or can't walk right, and you even if you get seriously drunk and you want to hit you can easily avoid him. And what happens is that in reality is that these men use alcohol as an excuse. And there is a tradition in Japan to excuse violent behavior in a drinking situation to begin with. So it's easy to say that, okay, I got easily mad and I hit you because I drunk, but he's not really seriously drunk. He's just using a glass of Japanese wine or a bottle of beer as an excuse to hit her, and it's a clever way of manipulating.
You talked about this TV law in 2001, which is probably an important step in Japan, and you said that most of the time violent men are not arrested by the police. So I wanted to ask you, what about the number of women among the police? If there are very limited amount of women in this important position where they can show their authority,
You mean
can put into question the seriousness of the...
You mean women officers? I think their number is extremely low.
That might explain why.
Well, there are two reasons. One is that Japanese police is very reluctant to arrest anybody to begin with. It's quite the opposite. I only know this case in the United States, but in the United States, police arrest anybody if you can find probable cause, and then start investigating if he is prosecutable or not. But the Japanese prosecution demands police that they do the investigation first before they make arrest, and arrest only those who are who can be successfully prosecuted. So if the fight breaks out in a drinking place and someone start to hit, some people start engaging in fist fights or something like that, the shop owner may call police, and the police will show up. But then police will just break off the fight, and maybe lecture these people and calm them down and don't make arrests. So a lot of violence are sort of, police turn away from a lot of these violent cases to begin with, and they're even more reluctant to get involved in domestic fights of any kind. And in fact, it was the same in the United States, that even they make easy, quick arrests outside, in public places, but American police was also reluctant to get into the house and make arrests. But then they actually, I think it was in 1990s, but three female victims of domestic violence sued the police and the prosecution for violating equal treatment under the law. If you hit somebody on the street, you get arrested. If you hit your wife inside home, you are not arrested. Then it's not fair. And then the lawsuit was successful, and then and many police and prosecutions in the United States changed their policy and started to make arrests inside house. And also many states enacted law to mandate police to make arrests. So when I went to Cambridge in 2000, we had a police briefing for newcomers at Harvard University, and I was only expecting that they maybe talk about traffic accidents or something of that sort. But the Cambridge police officer, the first things he said to us foreigners was that, okay, if your neighbor makes a phone call that they found, they heard some loud voices inside your house, we have to go there and arrest either you or your wife. It's mandated by law here. So I don't know what's the situation in your own country, but be aware that if you hit somebody and somebody sees you and call us, you will be arrested. And that's the situation in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Not every city in the United States. But
I can tell you what is the situation in France. I mean, and now actively recruit women to take care of these specific situations, because they don't want men to have to handle it.
Mm-hmm.
Because they will not listen, or they will listen to it with their own focus.
Yeah.
This is the question of women understanding other women.
And for what I would say, it's not happening in Japan. The female police officers, the number of female police officers is very low. And in fact, women in public offices are very low to begin with. Doesn't matter, police or government or anywhere. But and also, so that's the problem. Yeah.
Another point which is very near from what you said is I wanted to hear you a bit more about your expert witness in court. Do you think that judges are ready to hear you and to hear this woman? What is your experience about that?
My own experience is very limited, but I was quite unsuccessful convincing the judges that women cannot leave their abusive husbands. It's the same, either a policeman or a judge. They will ask you, why not leave if you're abused? Why not leave? Just leave. And since the abusive husbands are not literally chaining you at house or tie you up, or they're not following you 24 hours a day, you do have a chance to leave. You can escape if you want to. So if you didn't escape, you didn't want to escape, then you sort of accepted that situation. So it's your fault, right? Still, that logic prevails in court. And even if I explain to them that those women, these women are really in fear of their life, and they feel it is more dangerous to leave than to stay, and they are sort of manipulated psychologically to accept violence and stay on. So they cannot really, they don't have a free choice. But then the one judge asked me, is that same for everybody? And if not, and if some women do leave, then it is then she should be able to leave also. So if she stayed, she's not leaving. If she didn't leave, then it means she made her own choice. Well, academically interesting and personally and politically frustrating that those men who are actually making choice of violent behavior, they have the choice, right? But they are excused as, a sick person suffering from personality disorder or something. And only women are asked, they should have the choice. They should make their choices. And those who are not able to make choices are held responsible for making choices. And those who are who have power to make choices are excused. And it's really hard to change this situation.
There's a lot of judges are male, actually.
Oh, yeah, and even female judges, too.
So thank you so much. I have two questions. And one is at the beginning, you mentioned that your wife mentioning, well, it must be worse in Japan. And your colleague, foreign colleague said, well, Japanese are so polite, probably domestic violence probably wouldn't be such an issue. So I'm very curious to ask whether you have empirical data or for your involvement. What's your impression between, let's say, US and Japan when it comes to domestic violence, which is a little bit worse, for example? And the second question is, actually, I am also a medical anthropologist working at Emory University in the US. So I'm very interested in, as an anthropologist, what kind of methods you were able to apply, like, what kind of participant observation you were able to do, what kind of interviews you talk to, and any kind of findings you have so far.
Well, for the first question, I would say there is no difference. And my hypothesis is that the problem is universal, and it doesn't matter if you are an American or a Japanese or a Nuer.
You're talking about the nature.
Yeah. And then, well, it's as I said, it's really difficult to figure out, to assess the real figures or real percentage of domestic violence. So it's really difficult to statistically compare any society. But my anthropological guess is that the problem is universal and the frequency is not that different across culture. But and I did some a little bit of research on anthropological studies of domestic violence all over the world. And the first finding is that there is not much done, so we don't really know about the situation. There are few. Well, I would say any field worker who does some kind of intensive research in a small place, they come back with all kinds of anecdotes on family violence, and I would say every anthropologist knows that it's happening in their field too. But then very few thick ethnographies are written on the subject. It's not treated as a main issue in anthropology yet. And there are a few books on sort of a cross-cultural comparison of domestic violence. And I think we can say that it doesn't matter if your culture endorses or tacitly endorses, male violence or not. More important is three things relates to the possibility of women escaping from violence. Three factors are, I would say, there are three factors that are most important in determining if women can leave abusive husband or not. And one is economic independence. If in that society women has an independent means of economic sustenance. If you can support yourself, it's more easy to, it is easier for you to leave. And then, the second is the system of marriage. If it is easy to get divorced in that society, and divorce is not stigmatized, then it is easier for women to leave abusive husband. They can easily get divorced. And the third factor is that if there's anyone who is culturally authorized to get involved on behalf of abused women, so it could be a godfather or or a sort of matchmaker. If he is culturally and socially sanctioned to intervene and say to the abusive husband, enough is enough, and if that person is authoritative enough to impose his will on the abusive husband, then the domestic violence in that society doesn't get that serious compared to others. And so if you look at any society and see if women is economically independent or not, then how is the marriage system, and if it is easy to get divorced or not. And then finally, if there is anyone who can support abused wife, then you can sort of guess the degree of domestic violence in that society. And if for instance, the worst case scenario is that you marry into a husband village, and everybody in that village is your husband's relatives, and you are all alone. Nobody's going to support you, and it's hard to get divorced, and you are not economically, you have no economic means. Then you are in a dead end. And it happens that some villages in Tohoku are like that still. And does this answer your question?
Well, actually, I'm particularly interested in kind of research methods you are able to apply, and who you are mainly interacting with.
Well,
oftentimes anthropologists end up spending some time kind of listening to subject very long term, and so it was very interesting you mentioned that you talked to the police officers in Cambridge. So I was curious to learn whether you have interaction with organizations like Men Stopping Violence in the U.S., or whether you interact with mainly men who have the history and record of domestic violence, or who you actually mainly had a chance to.
Well, I'm not a researcher, at least as far as this topic is concerned, and I'm an active partisan, and I belong to the group supporting victims of domestic violence. So I'm not a neutral, impartial observer at all. I call myself a partisan observer, and so I do talk to these women activists running shelters, and I do talk to women who come to these shelters and listen to their stories, and when I get involved in court cases, then the lawyers, the victim's lawyer will contact me and provide me with all the police documentation and prosecution interviews and all that. And then I will sometimes talk to the women themselves and their families or children. And but I don't interview abusive husbands, and I don't think I can do that because I'm totally taking sides, and I'm on the side of the victims, and I'm not on the side of the abusers, and so I don't do research on them. And the one reason that they all tell lies, but another reason is that I'm not really doing this for a sort of a objective research.
Well, that's actually very helpful because And I'm also actually studying, working with domestic violence in organizations and in women. But from the title, I wasn't sure that you had the chance to talk to actually sort of men who are on the abusive side, because that's the other side of their stories. Eventually, we need to hear in order for the long-term prevention. But, yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, and another reason I say I cannot do that is because these victims and survivors and their supporters and activists have trust in me because I'm on their side 120%. And I think that's the position I have to keep.
I think there's for violence, those who are sick, they have to go to hospital. But other cases, I think it's before I met someone very good in communication. He said 3 points important for understanding and consideration for the others and communication and cooperation. So in the family, in the couple, in couples where they have problem, first of all, no respect is not enough between each other, and also communication is not sufficient. If you understand the other, you will not be angry so easily. But to understand the others, it's not so easy. I met a Japanese woman, Mary. She said to me, and I understood my husband 20 years after my marriage. So, I'm among Japanese. So, to understand that others, it takes a long time. And also, cooperation is bringing up children or something, common objective to couples. So, I think in cases of domestic violence in Japan, I think the lack of one of 3 points. If they are normal, if they are sick mentally, they have to go to hospital. But such a case is, well, maybe some cases are very risky. So no case, but it's very difficult to medicate. But in many cases, I think in Japan we are not making efforts for promoting these 3 things. At school or jobs and family.
You have some comments?
Well, that's for regular, ordinary couple. And if you don't have any violent problems, that's fine. But the real serious abusers, abusive husbands, they totally lack empathy. They don't see their wives and children as human beings. Just their, I would say, they see them just as tools for their own satisfaction. And there are some studies done on these perpetrators of domestic violence in the United States, and David Adams is one of the founder of this group, Emerge, and he has a book on those abusers who killed their wives, and he is trained in psychology as well, and his finding is that the single most common feature of these abusive husbands who go to the point of killing their wives is the total lack of empathy. So it's beyond, they have no interest in communication, or they have no interest in cooperation. They have no interest in anything except himself. And he sees everything else in his family as servants or slaves. So regular family counseling doesn't work. It's not inherited. It's learned behavior, and it is more likely that if you grow up in an abusive environment, then it is more likely that you yourself becomes abuser if you are a boy, and it is more likely to become a victim if you are a girl. So there's a major gender difference, and it also so if the same stimulus creates same response, both men and boys and girls should become abusive, but then their reactions are totally different. They are learning different cultural roles.
Well, I get the psychological reasons are quite difficult to catch, but I would like to go back to the local society. As you said, you have three factors which can explain how a society is more or less permitting this kind of violence. And one of the three factors you said is how much there is somebody who can intervene within the couple. And I remember in your English paper you write about a family who decided to pay the husband quite a lot of money so that he go out of the village and the woman can be safe. No, I remember a case like that. Oh, okay. It was in different. Sorry, but what I wanted to say is maybe in a local society. I mean, in Japan now, or maybe in Tohoku or Yamagata or whatever, you had maybe some people who. My question is, in a local and more traditional society like in Yamagata or Tohoku, who was able to intervene? And now that, as you say, the local community is broken up, except the law, who will be able to intervene?
Well, in the past, I would say you could only rely on your own family, or your natal family, or your relatives. But it so happens that these husbands who commit violence to their wives are often in high positions in the village or a kinship group, and so he has the power to control other people too. So it's really difficult to rely on anyone who is it's not a joke, but it once happened, and this is the case of child abuse. But a member of a Yakuza group was abusing his child. So his wife went to the boss of that Yakuza group and asked him to, tell her husband, stop. And he did. And then he is more powerful than him. So he listened. So that kind of mechanism has to be in place to really have effective control of domestic issue, and I don't think any traditional Japanese communities had that kind of thing, especially for marrying in women. And so nowadays, what this DB law did was to create a new system or new authority for intervening in family issues, and it's difficult to say, but in many cases when women get restriction order from the court, then their husband stop abusing her, at least for the duration of that restraining order or protection order. And some of course do violate the protection order, and then he may get arrested for violating the protection order. But these things do happen, and the real serious ones who can even commit murder, it is hard to restrain them even with police force or protection order or this kind of thing. So it's very difficult. But
another problem might be the violence against migrant women. I mean, the women from, for example, the Philippines or Korea, or who cannot who cannot ask for help. Do you have some information about the situation of these women?
Well, yeah. So if you're married to foreigners, then then you can have more power over her than over other Japanese women because of your language ability or cultural thing, and also many foreign women who are married to Japan, married to Japanese husbands, are not are isolated, and they don't live in they don't have a network, and even if they go to church, maybe some church might be able to help them or so and so on, but they have less means or less resource available for them than compared to Japanese women. So they are in a more serious situation. If you don't still have, and if you're looking for a Japanese citizenship, then you have to be married for 5 years at least. So that 5 years is another, becomes a powerful means for husband to control your wife.